Hey there. For this section, we are writing parallel and perpendicular equations. Remember, this unit is all about equations, slope-intercept form, standard form. So again, here's another type of equation that we have, and that is parallel and perpendicular equations. We've already talked about what parallel lines are and about their slopes. Their slopes are the same. Perpendicular lines, their slopes have negative reciprocals. Remember, one's positive, one's negative. That's why it's negative reciprocals. So what are we going to be doing? Well, given a linear equation in a certain point, you can create another equation that passes through this point and is either parallel or perpendicular to the given line. So keep in mind these following points. Parallel lines have same slope. Perpendicular lines have negative reciprocal slopes. Right? So now, here's one of the examples that we have. We're going to write the equation of a line that passes through the point negative 2 and 7 and is parallel to the line y equals negative 4x plus 1. Well, if we know what this line looks like when we graph it, right? If I were to graph this line, my beginning point's 1 and my slope is negative 4 over 1. So I would go down 4 over 1, down 4 over 1. And this is a rough draft of what that line would look like. Well, my question is calling for a parallel line that passes through the point of negative 2, 7. Well, if I can imagine negative 2, 7 on my graph, negative 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So up here. It's got to pass through that line and it has to be parallel. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take information that I know. If it's parallel, my slope has to be the same. So if this is a negative 4 slope, my new line has to have a slope of negative 4. And my new line has to pass through the point negative 2 and 7. Okay? That's the information that I need. We have already gone over how to write an equation of a line that passes through a certain point and has a slope. Remember a couple videos back, I gave you two options. You can use the slope-intercept point slope formula, or you can use the shortcut. So I'm going to use the shortcut just because that's what I do. So my shortcut is y equals mx plus b. I know my y value is 7 because that's my new point. 7 equals, my slope is negative 4, and my x value of that point is negative 2. And so now I need to find my beginning point. So 7 equals negative 4 times negative 2 is 8 plus b. And my beginning point is now, when I subtract 8 on both sides, negative 1. So my beginning point is negative 1. Well, now I have a slope. Now I have a beginning point. So my new line is going to be y equals negative 4x minus 1. So what that's saying is these lines are parallel, and my new line passes through the point negative 2, 7. Okay? So that's what that one looks like. Let's do another example together. So let's take a look at number 2. I can't figure out the slope right away because it's in standard form. So my first task is that I need to figure out the slope. So I'm going to subtract x. I have negative 3y equals negative x plus 9. I divide everything by negative 3. And I get y equals negative divided by negative is positive 1/3 x minus 3. So my new line has to be parallel to this one. Well, if it's parallel, what does my new line slope have to be? Well, if this is 1/3, my new slope has to be 1/3 also because they're parallel. So now I need to create a line that's parallel to this one of 1/3 and passes through the point of 3, negative 1. So again, I can do point slope formula, or I can do the shortcut. I'm going to do the shortcut. So I'm going to use y equals mx plus b. My y value is negative 1. My slope is 1/3. My x value is 3. And I'm looking for a beginning point. So negative 1 equals 1/3 times 3 is 1 plus b. Subtract 1 on both sides. And I get negative 2 equals b. So my beginning point is negative 2. So now I'm going to find the new equation. Well, I have a slope and a beginning point, so my new line is going to be y equals 1/3 x minus 2. And now this line, this equation of a line, is parallel to this one and it passes through the point 3, negative 1. Okay? So that's parallel lines, writing equations. How would I do perpendicular lines? Well, perpendicular lines, remember, have a negative reciprocal. So if I want to pass through this point, and it needs to be perpendicular to this, my first task is to find out, okay, in my new equation, if it's perpendicular, what does my new slope have to be? My new slope has to be perpendicular to this one. So if this one's 2, my new slope is going to be negative 1/2, because negative 1/2 and 2 are perpendicular to each other. And my new equation has to pass through this point of 4 and 3. So now that I have the information I need for my new equation, now I just have to find a line. So I'm going to use my shortcut, y equals mx plus b. My y value is 3. My slope is negative 1/2. My x value is 4 plus b. So 3 equals negative 1/2 times 4 is negative 2 plus b. And to find b, I add 2 to both sides, and b equals 5. So my new slope is going to be negative 1/2. My beginning point is 5. So for me to make my linear equation, I just plug it in. Y equals negative 1/2 x plus 5. And now this line is perpendicular, and I can tell they're perpendicular because they both have negative reciprocals. This one's positive 2, this one's negative 1/2. And this line will pass through the points 4 of 3. I know that because if I check it, watch what happens. If I plug in 3 for y, and I plug in 4 for x, watch what happens here. 3 equals negative 2 plus 5, and 3 equals 3. It checks out. So that means that this point definitely passes through here because it's equality on both sides. Right? Let's look at the next example. Now I want to find a line that's perpendicular to this one and passes through this point. Well, I don't know the slope of this line, so my first task is I need to find the slope. So I'm going to subtract 5x on both sides. 3y equals negative 5x minus 21. Divide both sides by 3, and I get y equals negative 5/3 x minus 7. So the slope of this one is negative 5/3. So what does my slope of my new line have to be? Well, if this one is negative 5/3, it needs to be a negative reciprocal. So if this one's negative, that guy has to be positive, and then I flip my reciprocal. So my new slope has to be 3/5. If you have questions on how to find that, we go back to the video of perpendicular lines, and then I talk about that there. Okay, so now my new line has to have the slope of 3/5, and it needs to pass through the point negative 5, 1. I'm going to erase this so I can get more workspace. So now that I have my new information, I have a slope and I have a point, I'm going to use my shortcut, y equals mx plus b, and I'm just going to plug in values. My y is 1, my slope is 3/5, my x value is negative 5 plus b. So 1 equals, this cancels out to be negative 1. Negative 1 times 3 is negative 3 plus b. Add 3 on both sides, and my b equals 4. So now that my beginning point's 4 and my slope is 3/5, I create my new line. Y equals 3/5 x plus 4. And voila. It's perpendicular. This one was negative 5/3. This one's 3/5. And it passes through the point negative 5, 1. And I can check that by plugging it in and seeing if it's the same. So 1 equals, this is negative 3. Negative 3 plus 4 is 1. So it checks out. So it's perpendicular. Okay? All right. Let's look at some more practice. So now, this is just more practice. So it's parallel. So if it needs to be parallel, it's got to be 2. My new equation has to have a slope of 2, and it needs to pass through the point negative 4, negative 1. So now I just make my y equals mx plus b and plug in. Negative 1 equals 2 times negative 4 plus b. I'm solving for my new line. Negative 1 equals negative 8 plus b. Add 8 to both sides. B equals 7. So my new line has a beginning point of 7 and a slope of 2. So y equals 2x plus 7. And that's my new line that's parallel to this given these facts. And then down here, of course, we would have to find my slope first. It's still parallel, so I'm going to find the slope, divide by -2, and I get y equals 1/2 x. And it doesn't really matter what my beginning point is over here. But my new line has to have a slope of 1/2, and it has to pass through the point 4/5. So now, let me create more workspace. I'm just going to use my shortcut, y equals mx plus b. My y value is 5. My slope is 1/2. My x value is 4 plus b. So 5 equals 2 plus b. Subtract 2 on both sides, and I get b equals 3. So my new line has a slope of 1/2 and a beginning point of 3. So now it's going to look like y equals 1/2 x plus 3. And that's the equation of my new line. All right. Let's do one more on perpendicular, just to have some more examples in your notebook. So it's perpendicular to this one. So my new line has to be perpendicular to 3/4. So perpendicular slope then would be -4/3. This one's positive, this one has to be negative, and they're reciprocal. So -4/3, and it passes through the point 3, -3. So now I'm going to use my shortcut, y equals mx plus b. -3 is y, slope is -4/3. My x value is 3 plus b. So -3 equals 3's cancel out, and I'm left with -4 plus b. Add 4 to both sides, and b equals 1. So my new line has a slope of -4/3 and a beginning point of 1, which means it's going to be y equals -4/3 x plus 1. And that's my new perpendicular line. So if you have any questions, let me know. Good luck.